Alright, my little zippity doodads, we finally reached the end. That's right, I know I normally dedicate a video to each arc individually, but since there were only 6 volumes left and the last 2 arcs are kinda on the short side, not that there's anything wrong with that, I figured it was a good opportunity to not drag this series out artificially, so you guys are getting 2 arcs in one video. And seeing as I want to talk about everything in this video, I'm not going to belabor this intro. I saw that a lot of you guys were saying that you prefer this chapter black stuff more than Dark Tournament, and that just got me even more excited. And without spoiling anything right off the bat, I can kinda see why. Let's kick this video off with my review and thoughts of the incredibly well-conceived and fresh Chapter Black. I can't exactly make any judgment calls on the quality of the overall arc just yet, but after 3 volumes of demon-related shenanigans, the very first page of this new arc promises something entirely new, which is on its own a terrific and intriguing start. And what's more is, Togashi isn't afraid to jump right into the action, all the while retaining a shroud of mystery. Humans have started to prop up with strange powers, and before Yusuke is conscripted into investigating the matter, he's kidnapped by said humans. Hiei, Kurama, Kuwabara, and Botan now are tasked with locating the kidnappers in order to save Yusuke, which is the complete opposite of what we've gotten used to so far. And they establish all of that in just the first 2 chapters. The pacing is outstanding here, but what grabbed me about this opening is how it effectively achieves 2 things right off the bat. Much of this arc will be focused on a specific trait Yusuke has: his impatience and inability to not barge into a fight unprepared. Granted, he didn't know that these kids he ran into were going to cause him trouble, but he, the winner of the Dark Tournament, ends up being kidnapped by this guy called Kido and his friends anyway. So being blindsided isn't exactly the best excuse for someone of his caliber. And with that, we establish the running goal of this arc, for Yusuke to overcome this flaw and to grow from it. It's excellent stuff, but there's more. This arc's opening is one of the most interesting and engaging to me because, with Yusuke now out of the picture, the dynamic within the group of Hiei, Kuwabara, Botan, and Kurama is now entirely different to anything we've seen before. It feels so fresh and exciting as all of these personalities get to take turns occupying the spotlight in their own pursuit of Yusuke once Botan brings them all together for this purpose. Speaking of... So, I might have said that the intro to this arc was awesome and top tier, but forget that. I was an idiot, I spoke too soon, because this next stuff is even better. And it might be even my favorite sequence in this series from a writing or dialogue standpoint. Or at the very, very least, it highlights what is so wonderful and exciting about the arc to come. As our 4 heroes mosey on inside to try to find their kidnapped MC, we encounter the first of 3 individuals they need to overcome. Someone whom Kurama is familiar with, a kid called Kaito. This arc promised a lot with its initial premise, humans suddenly possessing strange and mysterious powers. But promise is all fine and dandy, but eventually you will have to back it up by delivering something worthwhile. That is what this fight is. Worthwhile, to say the least. It's Togashi's proof of concept, and I don't think I could have conceived of a better way to go about things. So much of what makes this arc so fun and interesting is of course the mystery surrounding each encounter. 90% of the fights in this arc are entirely different to anything you'll see at any other point in this story up until now. Shonen stories like One Piece, Dragon Ball, Naruto, and even HunterXHunter all establish power systems and slowly build on those over time. But this arc, it feels like a coming together of 2 entirely different stories. We have, of course, our collection of main characters and supporting characters with all the things that we know that they can do, but we also have these human characters now that are propping up everywhere with strange and interesting new abilities. And this first fight against Kaito demonstrates that through Hiei. Initially, he treats this encounter with the relaxed Kaito, who's waiting patiently in this room, with the same level of caution he would any other fight up until now. And that's exactly why he's the first taken out. It appears Kaito's power, called Taboo, grants him the ability to establish verbal rules those within his vicinity need to adhere to. If they break those rules, they get their souls stolen by Kaito. And just like that, suddenly physical fighting doesn't matter. Suddenly, this is now a battle of wits, a contest that feels equal parts YuYu Hakusho and a contemporary series at the time like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. These really could be a series of stand battles straight out of Part 3, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were inspired by it given JoJo's huge surge in popularity at the time. With Hiei being taken out easily towards the beginning of this encounter, Togashi is once again reinforcing the theme of you need to prepare a strategy before just barging into a conflict. The word that Hiei said that triggered his soul's rapture was hot. And so following this, after some funny Kuwabara suggestions to leave Hiei and move on, the game becomes who can avoid saying the word hot the longest.
Feeling hot, hot, hot.
Trapped in a situation that demands those that participate follow a set of clearly established rules, as the game progresses we learn more and more of the finer details of those rules and Kaito's powers. A la Kuwabara losing his soul by saying the word shots, a word which contains the word hot. But by the end, only Kaito and Kurama remain. Eager to take things to the next level in terms of difficulty, Kurama makes a suggestion or amendment to the current rules for Kaito to implement. But what makes us lean in here is that during this suggestion, he adds that he'll defeat Kaito in just 26 minutes. And that's when I had this thought. Damn! This might be the most compelling Kurama encounter I've experienced in this manga. I love mind games like this, and perhaps it's the reprieve I'm getting from the action carrying this thought for me, but I truly loved this encounter. He very much feels like the calm and collected Jotaro to Kaito's Darby the Gambler, preying on his ego, manufacturing a way to dictate terms in an arrangement he truthfully has no power in. And if you thought 26 minutes was a suspicious number, you'd be right. For every minute that passes, a letter from the alphabet will be removed from play. It's a super fun concept and one that lends itself well to tension and humor. This encounter far exceeded my wildest expectations. Togashi is incredibly talented. As the time ticks on by, Kaito gets nervous, and with only one letter remaining, Kurama is nowhere to be seen when... That was awesome. Okay, time to move on to the next section. This is the final segment of this introduction to this arc and how it works. And while not as compelling as the prior, I still very much enjoyed it. I think I didn't have as much fun with this one as the mystery surrounding the encounter gets lifted shortly after. Which is hardly a criticism of Togashi's writing here, as it's more a desire of mine for this segment to never end. Following the watchful eye of one of the trio, our gang each ascend a flight of stairs in the hopes of reaching the room Kido is holding Yusuke hostage. They all seem to arrive on the scene, but as Kido makes Yusuke aware, one of them is a fake. Ooh, exciting! This is another amazing mind game from Togashi, and one which shifts our perspective back to Yusuke. With Yusuke having only 10 minutes to decipher the fake, he spends the entire 10 minutes getting absolutely nowhere of worth, which, is incredible work. And in the end, he ends up pulling a Volume 1 Yusuke move and just decking Kuwabara seemingly at random and happening to be right. Now, I know what you're thinking, and to be honest, I was thinking the same thing too initially. Was this a devolution of the Yusuke character? Was Togashi falling back on luck as the key factor which decided Yusuke's conflicts? Thankfully, no. There's a key difference in how this conclusion is presented that really shows how far Togashi has come in writing this manga. You see, while Yusuke does initially pay it off like it was dumb luck, it is immediately revealed that there were some reasonably sound logic bits behind this decision. He knew Kurama and Hiei were too strong to get easily nabbed for this stunt, and that the enemies would know nabbing Botan would send Yusuke into a very dangerous fit of rage, leaving only Kuwabara as a prime contender. It's solid logic, or at least solid enough for me. Either way, the vibe of this success by luck instance feels so much better than the ones that plague the early chapters of the series. This isn't the writing of an inexperienced author unsure of how to end a fight, it's one with confident intent. No unearned victories, no lack of character in the path to success, none of that. We still get the laugh of I owed Kuwabara one without any of the disappointing deflation. Hooray for everybody. However, as it happens, this introductory series of challenges was just that, an introduction to the broader reach of this story, and with one panel, Togashi forces us all to lean in because Genkai is back and was behind the entire sequence from the get-go. Oh no! Togashi revealing that this was all just an elaborate prank by Genkai feels a little deflating considering how much tension was built up earlier, but to be honest, that's a minor fleeting gripe for me. I really enjoyed the introduction to this arc, so much of it focused on character-centric challenges to the cast rather than just fists and blasts, and thankfully that is in fact a trend that's carried forward through much of this arc. And at the very least, Togashi is kind of upfront about Genkai's renewed existence in the story. That is, to introduce, the real problem that is unfolding here. And it's right here where we're made aware of the main focus of the arc itself. That there's a giant gate to the demon realm being opened up, someone has carried on Sakyo's wishes, and this demonic portal is widening by the hour. But the most interesting wrinkle in this, I think, is the introduction of demon ranks to the story. The reveal that demons are ranked D to S and that Toguro, the unstoppable beast of just a few chapters ago, is a mere rank B, well, it is just bound to get the mind racing with questions and excitement, creating a wonderful anticipation in the process. This has been done already in Dragon Ball with power levels, and this letter ranking system was even used much later to great success in One Punch Man. It's a wonderfully effective narrative tool. My first thought here was that the higher ranks didn't make much sense, given how lauded over Toguro was as one of the baddest tough guys to ever tough around in the entire demon community. But thankfully, Togashi not only addresses that concern, but uses it to further deepen the intrigue and mystery surrounding the arc itself. It is explained that rank A and S demons dwell exclusively in the deepest, darkest planes of the demon realm, and are completely unable to cross over into the human world or interact with just about anyone outside of their own planes. For many of the B-class demons and below, these highest tiers of demons are just as much myth as they are for humans. Their power is so far beyond what the lower ranks can even comprehend or reach that the two may as well be completely unrelated. Now that's what I call a compelling fail state. The goal and stakes of this arc are set up and crystal clear from the get-go, and that fact alone can help drive a story incredibly well. With only 3 weeks of time to work with, the team, minus Hiei, who is too much of a grumpy gremlin to give a shit, splits into two, with Kurama's crew investigating the hole itself and Yusuke's crew immediately heading off to Swarm City, the affected city, to investigate for clues. Well, that is, as soon as they remember Kaito is still soulless. Along the way, Yusuke's crew manages to recruit Murota, another mutated human whose wiretap ability allows him to read minds. A useful asset for the team in the future, but honestly, the most important bit here is this singular panel of Yusuke's inner monologue that I could look at 10,000 times and still laugh at. What a guy! The real result of this addition to the party, however, is the scene that follows. Murota is used as a sort of search beacon, sifting through the thoughts of anyone within a 30-mile radius, trying to find the ringleader of this portal opening business. And the moment he does locate him, now that was creepy. The way the manga in particular depicts this is simply chilling. The reader is placed alongside our heroes in a position of control and security. Covertly and undetected, we peer into the minds of others with the understanding that we are the ones getting the drop on them, that we have the element of surprise. And that chilling fear emanates from the page when it's revealed that we were mistaken, that we are not in control, he is. The immediate turn toward the camera, the uneven hatching detailing on the face, the pace of the entire thing is all contained within a single page, 3 panels no less, and made it clear to me in seconds that this guy is not only creepy, but entirely in control. A control he possesses thanks in part to careful preparation and strategy. Those of you following along will see why this is important, but for now, let's move on. From here, the goal establishing is done. We've moved to a hospital, and Murota has recovered enough to relay a few bits of information he got from Sensui amidst all of the other insane inner monologue. 7 names, all likely indicative of their abilities: Dark Angel, Gatekeeper, Sniper, Gourmet, Game Master, Doctor, and Seaman.
Seaman!
And with that, all the cards for this arc are officially down. Creepy Man and his sinister set of 7 supervillains are all opening a hole to the deepest reaches of the demon realm. And if Yusuke and co can't defeat them all and stop it, then Class S demons with strength untold will flood into Earth and everyone will die. It sounds pretty straightforward when you spell it out like that, but everything is shrouded in so much mystery and revealed in such an interesting fashion that I was hooked all the way through. Now, of course, it doesn't take long before one of those 7 members makes himself known, as an evil entity has suddenly expanded his territory in the hospital. Now, class, it's time for some group participation. Which of the 7 members do you think would be in the hospital? Is it A, Seaman, B, Game Master, or C, Doctor? If you answered C, Doctor, then congratulations, you're smarter than these dumbasses. Once again though, this arc establishes its encounter as far more than just who can punch who harder. Because not only is the Doctor letting loose a swarm of demon mosquitoes that afflict a terrible sickness as well as having hands that cut like scalpels, but the Doctor himself is hiding in plain sight in the hospital. After splitting up to look for clues, Kido, the shadow user, manages to stumble upon the Doctor early on, but is instantly paralyzed, left only to watch on in horror. Yusuke overhears this calamity and rushes into the scene, but that doesn't really do much when the only living witness is now paralyzed. This begins a fascinating game where Kido and Yusuke have to manage to work together despite an inability to communicate. And this really is a prime example of how ingenious these human mutated powers are on Togashi's part. They become not just vessels for different types of combat, but a utility to create fascinating and compelling scenarios. This is nail-biting stuff as the Killer Doctor is inches from Yusuke, but in one of the sickest moves to date, Kido is able to use his shadow powers to prevent Yusuke from mistakenly giving chase elsewhere. That on its own is such an utterly ingenious use of the tools at the character's disposal, but the creative innovation doesn't stop there. That play is enough to communicate to Yusuke that he's conscious and something is up, but not who the threat is necessarily. Through a tumultuous inner monologue on Kido's part, he finally manages to arrive at the only solution left available to him. By moving his shadow, he spells out the name of the Doctor in disguise. Now, come on! That's just brilliant! It's such a wonderfully tense visual and an incredible way to have the ball drop on Yusuke. In a world where a mere arc ago it felt like the powers and restrictions of the world were set in stone, Togashi manages arc over arc to breathe new life into this story. It's the sort of cerebral and clever writing I found in JoJo as Araki began to expand on stand encounters. To see that filtered through Togashi is amazing. The Doctor even strikes a JoJo pose. With all that said, the dynamic in this fight is once again novel and unique. Oftentimes in these shonen stories, once the training is done and the big bad is defeated in the prior arc, things sort of reset and the hero once again finds himself in over his head, despite how competent the main character became in the prior arc. But here, Yusuke is as capable as he has ever been. He has Superman speed and power, not to mention his ray gun, and the Doctor isn't inexplicably strong because the story demanded it. He's simply enhanced by the powers that he has in specific, believable ways. Believable ways that he, as an enemy, entirely leans into. The Doctor cannot land a single attack, but what he can do is prolong the fight by manipulating his nervous system. And having established that all of his friends will die in less than 10 minutes thanks to the virus he unleashed, it's a potent plan to say the least, particularly against someone like Yusuke who has the power to stop him, but he needs information and doesn't want to kill him. In the end, the Doctor actually manages to succeed over Yusuke in a way, as Yusuke is forced to kill him, saving everyone infected by the mosquito demons. Not all is lost though, as Genkai is able to use some of her good old-fashioned spirit healing business to resuscitate the Doctor, where he is now left to play a future role. At this point, 2 days have now passed, and Koenma shows up to use some geometry no jutsu to explain how the timeline is actually 1 week rather than 2. But more importantly, both for my own personal enjoyment as well as the plot, Kuwabara is ducking out of the upcoming mission. Not because he's scared or outmatched or anything like that, but because he has tickets to a Magelica concert.
I said 1 week, I'm using it!
First of all, let me just say that abandoning saving the world to see a live show is extremely valid. Kuwabara, I hear and understand you. Life without music is indeed not worth living. But second, while the whole sequence is obviously funny and partially played for laughs, it actually hides Togashi performing some sneaky pawn repositioning for the story itself. The following sequence is where Seaman,
It's not Seaman, it's Seaman!
makes himself known. But the target isn't Yusuke, the target is Kuwabara, of whom has now made himself completely alone and largely defenseless as his aura still hasn't recovered. With Hiei still doing gremlin activities, Kurama still off investigating, and Yusuke too annoyed at Kuwabara to have followed his worried instincts, Kuwabara finds himself completely isolated. Easy pickings for Seaman.
It's Seaman!
Who very clearly outmatches Kuwabara in his current state. Unlike the previous matches in this arc, this encounter is no test of wit or skill. It's really a test of how stubborn Kuwabara is willing to be, and how many times he can insult the enemy along the way. Even when utterly beaten, his friends taken hostage in the middle of droning against an enemy stand and facing a seemingly unbeatable foe, Kuwabara just refuses to stop swinging. It's a trait that he's always carried with him throughout the story, but most every occasion, he ended up being backed up by his companions or spurred them through new heights. But this time, there's no companion to rise up. It's only him until... This entire section is plotted so deceptively well that it's kind of nuts. Kuwabara has struggled to find his place in the world for a while now, especially since Yusuke achieved new heights in the Dark Tournament arc. With so many powerful and talented allies at Yusuke's side now, what role is Kuwabara left to play but the damsel in distress who spurs Yusuke to greater heights? But this time the payoff isn't Yusuke arriving and kicking ass, it's Kuwabara achieving new heights, while also carving out a wholly unique niche for himself in this plot. Being the long sought after man who can split dimensions, this not only places Kuwabara back in a precarious role, as Sensui and co need that very talent to finish the demonic portal, but also once again carves out a unique position for Kuwabara to play. In the early days, it was his strong sixth sense, and now it is this. As a certified Kuwabara fan, you can color me excited and very pleased with this outcome. As if this encounter weren't already surprisingly pivotal enough, the thematic undertone for the enemies finally begins to rear its head. Throughout the arc so far, each of the enemies has had a clear lack of humanity, and outright disdain for their own human race. It's somehow even more vitriolic than the default hate for humans that all the previous demons had showcased. And with Seaman, aka Kiyoshi, it was no different. However, when Kuwabara defeated Seaman, accepting his fate, he waited for a swift death, but to his surprise, it never came. After all he's done, despite his own damning words, Kuwabara wasn't going to kill him because he wanted to use what he knows to save more people. The confusion plastered across Kiyoshi's face here during this interaction just says it all. There's a dissonance created, a core belief that was beginning to shatter. The core belief, it turns out, originates from the titular arc-defining Chapter Black, or Black Chapter as the English manga puts it, a VHS tape of humanity's darkest, most cruel and depraved acts throughout history. Naturally, it doesn't take much imagination to envisage what sort of imagery that tape contained. In fact, some of it is repeated by Kiyoshi in great detail. This tape is the core reason behind each of the 7 members of the Sensui group and has very clearly instilled in them a feeling of utter disgust and helplessness in the world. Forgive me for the detour here, but as I read this entire exchange, I was all but overcome with just how important and relevant these themes are to this very day. In modern times, it is seemingly impossible to go about our lives at all ages without bearing witness to orders of atrocities that we see online. The information age that we find ourselves in now has given us unbridled wisdom, insight, and, information. But it has also made it near impossible to avoid seeing just how bad the world and humanity can be. Ethnic cleansing, drone strike after drone strike, political assassinations, gang violence, epidemics of poverty and homelessness, starvation of children when there is plenty to go around. Even the very planet in which we all live on seems to be all but doomed. Stricken by the seemingly unstoppable parasite that is the human race's desire for more. Seeing all of this thrust upon us each and every year is understandably hard for some people to not lose hope with, to not give in to the nihilistic views of the world and feel that all is already lost, that we don't deserve to be there, that the human race is a plague, the machines that cause the atrocities are unstoppable, so why care? But Togashi and the YuYu Hakusho crew, by extension, totally rejects this outlook. Because, and I totally agree with this, hopelessness is easy. Seeing the world for what it is and giving into nothingness is not enlightened, it's easy. And dare I say, almost selfish. Each and every person has, to some capacity, the ability to make some part of the world a better place. We might not know how to fix all the problems just yet, but in the same way evil people exist, there too are and will continue to be more good people. People like Dr. Philip Frank Sauter and Colin Ure, who along with their team created small sachets that, when added to the nastiest water you can find, manage to separate the clean drinking water in seconds. It's like magic and breeds a quality of life to the African world that's stricken with water poverty. Or how about Dutch inventor Boyan Slat, who engineered an incredibly effective way to not only clean up a tremendous amount of the Earth's oceans, but has also many plans in place to prevent them from being polluted into the future. This is all to say that giving into despair is too easy. But looking at it in the face and marching forward, even if you don't have an answer at this exact moment, that's true bravery. Meeting evil with kindness and hope is all we can do. And it's exactly what Yusuke chooses to do in the face of all of this. It's the perfect message. He himself even says he has no idea what to tell Kiyoshi at this moment of his despair. But he chooses to move forward and do the best that he can in the best way that he can do it. And I think that is something every single kid, every single person on the planet right now should read and honestly needs to hear. Okay. With that detour out of the way, Togashi resumes layering even more intrigue onto this story with the reveal that Sensui was once a spirit detective, Yusuke's predecessor no less. A spirit detective with a strong sense of justice who encountered a group of utterly vile humans and was never able to properly reconcile with that incident. And with that, I think Togashi has officially checked pretty much every possible box for setting up an arc, its villains, its motivations, its thematic throughlines, everything. Upon this arc, Togashi has built an infinitely solid foundation, and I could not be more excited to keep reading. From this point on, the momentum of this arc picks up and never really stops. Sensui and Sniper show up, having bugged seamen,
Stop it!
leaving both Yusuke and Kuwabara to storm in and attack them. As you might expect, that doesn't go particularly well for them, with Yusuke totally outclassed with his head-on approach to fighting Sensui, and Kuwabara sneakily kidnapped by a guy who ate Elder Toguro to steal his power. Even Yusuke's full-power spirit gun just gets batted away by Sensui like it's nothing. Once again, these two kiddos ran headfirst into an encounter and suffered the consequences. So, how does Yusuke react to this? Well, he just gets even angrier and rushes them at Mach 5 on a bicycle? Okay, so that's fantastic stuff. I can't imagine this will end poorly at all. Once again, it doesn't take long for the rash behavior to yield dire consequences, needless to say. Yusuke is quickly pinpointed by Sniper, who is able to put magic targets on him, allowing Sniper to launch any object at Yusuke at high speeds from any distance. My man just cannot catch a break here. But again, he can't catch a break specifically because he refuses to stop and think. And as a result, Yusuke is having rocks, needles, a whole ass truck thrown at him on a whim. And frankly, Yusuke once again gets completely owned outright. Or at least that would have been the case if not for...
Nothing personnel, kid.
Our cool little gremlin boy is back. Not only is Hiei here to save Yusuke's ass, but also proves to be the only sensible child of the lot, as Yusuke tries to, once again, dash headfirst towards Sensui, and Hiei basically tells him how stupid he's being and starts beating the shit out of him. With Kuwabara captured and only 2 days till the portal is complete, what did I tell you about the insane momentum of the story? Yusuke and crew have a near impossible task laid out before them. At this point, we reach the endgame, pun absolutely intended, as the entire crew marches upon the enemy lair and encounters the first of the remaining enemies, Game Master. Similar to the abstract house at the beginning of the arc, Game Master has enshrouded the entire room in a condition that only the winner of Game Battler, a popular video game that is just a mashup of real-world video games, can emerge from the room. Unfortunately, this section is the first this arc really stumbled for me. Because while the situation is very similar to the abstract house in Kaito, every way that it tries to expand upon that idea just sort of makes it worse. With Kaito and his word game, the rules were simple and presented in a way that the readers could follow along with. It led to a gripping exchange where each twist and turn of strategy left us wondering where to go, like we were right beside Kurama. But here, none of that really applies. The first 3 games are mostly skipped over, with them being written as such a footnote that it left me wondering why they were all even shown in the first place, outside of a minor character development moment for Kiyoshi's one outing, but that still doesn't explain the other 2. But then, with the trivia game, it is purposely something we as readers aren't able to follow along with. The trivia is totally foreign to us, and Game Master's strategy of learning the question algorithm just leaves us further out of the loop. And yet the conclusion to this lackluster series of games somehow manages to be one of the darkest and emotionally moving parts of the story so far. What seemed to be a game of simply indefinitely stalling Yusuke until the portal is complete is revealed to be a trap for both parties, orchestrated by Sensui, the mastermind and ringleader of all of this. Because in the video game Game Battler, while losing results is a try-again state, winning results in the death of the boss. Which means either Game Master continues to win and keep Yusuke at bay, or he dies. This is the exact sort of mental pressure that Team Yusuke needed to overcome him, but at this point, that isn't really the problem, is it? Sensui abused a child's naivety and led him to an almost guaranteed demise. The final unsolvable conundrum is the fate of this deeply misled child. Crumbling under the realization of his mistake, he begs through tears for a way out of his inescapable death. The paneling of these final moments is stark and harrowing, and the illustration of Kurama afterwards, penned so intricately with Togashi's signature brush, is an impression that will stay with me for a very long time to come. Despite starting out rocky, this sequence really managed to find its footing, and in the end left me with one of the strongest impressions this series, and certainly this arc, has offered. I'm very much enjoying how prominent a role Kurama is playing in this arc. After our gang arrives at the portal, it's revealed that one of the remaining 7 that seems to possess the powers of the eldest Toguro brother was, in fact, him in disguise all along!
Oh, son of a bitch!
Or rather, that the elder Toguro being eaten didn't matter much because he just, took over the host anyway? I don't know, but either way, it's metal as all hell, and Kurama takes the lead on tackling him. Which makes sense, as ultimately Kurama is really the most important chess piece Togashi has at his disposal in this arc right now. For an arc whose theming is very clearly centered around growing Yusuke's maturity and forcing him to think before he acts, who better to contrast against him and exemplify the advantages of those virtues than the humble and calculated Kurama? In more ways than one, he represents the goal for him. When Yusuke is barging ahead, he's investigating. When Yusuke is backed into a corner, Yusuke needs to rely on others, or he gets soundly defeated, whereas Kurama remains calm and overcomes when the odds are tipping out of favor. If there's one thing about Kurama in this arc that's apparent, it's that he's rarely ever caught off guard to such an extent he becomes vulnerable. He's an uncompromisingly stoic and calculated individual. Per the promise he made prior, Kuwabara is returned to Yusuke, but in a show of control and force, he's quickly extracted from the arena the fighting has been taking place within, along with everyone else except Yusuke. This encounter sets up the final segment of the story, and with it, it brings to the forefront a contest between Yusuke and Sensui. And it might be more well conceived of than you might appreciate at first glance. On 3 fronts, this fight works to serve the Yusuke character, historically, emotionally, and mechanically within the narrative. From a historical point of view, this outing offers us the surface level chance to enjoy what a fight looks like between 2 spirit detectives. And as similarities often do, differences are emphasized. Mechanically, the story of this arc is Yusuke's journey to gain maturity in combat. Through our historical understanding of the character, we can recognize that this might not be something that comes naturally to Yusuke, but it nevertheless is something he ultimately needs to learn as he grows older. And who better to push him to this goal than his proverbial opposite? Where Yusuke rushes in all guns blazing, Sensui is a cool, calm and calculated enemy. One who has had Yusuke as well as seemingly the majority of his allies trapped in his web for the duration of this arc. Without them, his plan could never have succeeded. Quite literally. And Sensui played them all beautifully. In order to defeat this competent opponent, Yusuke now needs to follow what others have been telling him, what Genkai's been advising him. He needs to remain calm and formulate a clear plan of attack, which brings us to the most resonant difference between the 2 characters, their emotional differences. This might be the most compelling difference, and it's an element of their characters I've only recently become privy to, and in a way proves that not only is Yusuke right for this role as a spirit detective, but when it comes to temperament and philosophical outlook, Sensui was doomed to fail from the start. I spoke on this earlier, but there's a pattern of behavior and a nihilistic worldview at play here that colors each and every decision Sensui and his followers make. A disgust for humanity, viewing the world in naive absolutes. He sees people as black and white. Because of this, he was unable to see past humanity's admittedly horrific indiscretions, and thus concluded he's responsible for ending the plague on the earth that is humanity. It's an interesting concept and one perfect for a villain, but it's made all the more interesting when you consider what Yusuke offers as a foil to him. Where Sensui was a model citizen, Yusuke operates in the gray areas of morality. However, and this is important, Yusuke is still a good person, made evident by the countless good deeds he's committed on behalf of others. While Sensui represents everything on a strategic front that Yusuke needs to learn, Yusuke, on the other hand, possesses the positive and hopeful outlook on life that sees value in humanity. Where Sensui constructed a carefully curated plan, willing to march countless of his own pawns to their deaths in the name of this great mission, Yusuke, on the other hand, without thinking, has proven to be selfless to a fault, sacrificing himself in the name of a small child he didn't even know. But I do have my issues with this fight. There's a rather impactful page following Yusuke's first strike on Sensui. In it he says, "To me, fighting has always been an end in itself. That I get to take on threats to the human world is just icing on the cake." While this is a cool line and one that speaks to the differences in both men's approaches to the job they have/had, I feel like this, to a certain extent, is the first instance of Flanderization in this series. While Yusuke does indeed love to fight and often seeks it out, that doesn't define him. To refer to saving others as, quote, icing on the cake, I feel sort of betrays what his character has grown to represent in the series. From the very first chapter, he's demonstrated a need to save others, sacrificing his own life at a moment's notice, and by extension giving up every opportunity to fight into the future, all to save a single small child. That's a powerful moment that defined his character early on, and one that was only further reinforced in the Dark Tournament arc as he found his reason to fight. There will no doubt be folks in the comments right now that will be telling me it's not that deep, or that I'm reading too much into this, and perhaps I should just take this as the cool page that it is and leave it at that. But for whatever reason, I just didn't like how this dialogue hit my ears. It simplifies the character, yes, but to a degree I felt made him less interesting and betrayed who I thought he was in the first place. Something, however, rather interesting happens as this fight commences and evolves towards its resolution. There's some fitting characterization, some brilliant symbolism, and unfortunately, signs of things to come that I will dig into in more detail later on. Now, as I said, a massive component to this story taking place in this arc is the growth of Yusuke's character and his ability to strategize. And Sensui plays into this wonderfully, with himself not necessarily being stronger than Yusuke, but due to his approach is still able to gain the upper hand. Possessing the ability to foresee his opponent's moves might seem convoluted and rather strange to reveal at this juncture, but when you consider it really plays into the lessons Yusuke needs to overcome, it feels perfectly fitting to add as a hurdle for the young man to try and navigate here. However, probably my favorite element to this initial part of the Sensui vs Yusuke fight is how well Togashi combines Yusuke's natural roguish demeanor with fitting strategy to get the drop on Sensui. The aspect of Yusuke that makes him incorruptible compared with Sensui, his delinquent behavior, acts as his saving grace, allowing him to fight dirty. Kicking up Dusk to work around Sensui's guard, using his clothing to restrict his movement. Crude but fitting strategy for a kid like Yusuke to utilize. It's very reminiscent of the sort of crude but street-savvy approach Yusuke used in the first arc with his lighter. It's not pretty, but it gets the job done, and I love that. It's perfect for him. And while the fight continues to build higher and higher, leading eventually to revelations I'm still honestly processing, the rest of this fight's progression began to lose me, and more importantly, began to betray Yusuke's character at its core. Shinobu Sensui was a perfect foil for Yusuke in this arc, and complemented its themes excellently to boot. But more than that, we had really begun to know him. And now, at the final hour, we are finding out that he is actually 7 guys, and has a gun arm.
Okay.
Now, I don't want to be down on this story because, truth be told, from the very first arc all the way through to this point, I felt like this series was going from strength to strength. However, while I don't want to be overly negative, I also can't fabricate the feelings I have towards this fight now, because I genuinely do see issues here. Koenma arrives for a few minutes to step in but doesn't achieve much. Yusuke outright says that he doesn't care about the portal anymore and that he's only there for the fight, something that I would argue objectively flies in the face of not only the mission statement of this arc and what Genkai wants to teach him, but also betrays the core foundation of his character. Also that we can do what? Have a big dumb fight? One of the few elements that remains consistent in this arc's conclusion is the supporting cast, thankfully. Particularly Kuwabara, who leaps to action once Yusuke is pronounced dead during the fight, which I honestly loved. Cutting a tear in reality, landing them all in the demon plane to face off once again, but honestly, it all feels too little too late to me. And all this talk of strategy feels like it goes right out the window too. Characters like Kurama, who in the past represented clever and cunning strategies to overcome opponents in more advantageous positions, now are seen saying things like, and I quote, "He's stronger than we are at this moment, but that's all it takes to win." Okay. Like, this is literally the exact opposite of what we were being told all this time. What he's been telling us all this time, both directly and indirectly. And regrettably, the arc only falls further from this point, devolving into a fight that feels almost like a caricature of what shonen actually is. Lots of action seemingly for action's sake, all the way down to sudden transformations that feel like they jumped the shark. Honestly, this sudden shift felt stark to me, and it did my team too when they were collectively reading it. Eventually, we all stumbled across this Q&A with Togashi wherein he was asked, and I quote, "What was the most painful thing that happened while you were writing YuYu Hakusho?" And one of the two instances he mentioned was this very fight with Sensui. In it, he says that during the final battle, he didn't want to draw the manga anymore, and that he felt nauseous at the thought of just sitting down to draw. It is so clear, both on the pages as well as in his interviews, that Togashi was battling with his medical issues hard at this point. But rather than take a break and finish the arc when he could do it justice, he just had to trudge on and make do, an approach that ultimately cost the most promising arc yet its conclusion. The overall message of good and evil, nihilism versus hope, everything contained within most of this arc really, is one I think is both powerful and compelling. And I really did love reading most of this arc, but that is exactly why I'm so bummed by how it ended. Upon this story, Togashi had built an invincibly sturdy foundation, but I suppose that does no good when your foreman can't call out sick. The Three Kings arc. Alright, so let's reset. Let's take a breath and come to grips with something before I press onwards here. I know that folks out there will have already likely commented about the anime in this section being better or the definitive way to consume this story, so consider the following as my address of this concern. Like I have said countless times in the past, and even within this very video series, the content of what I am reviewing and speaking about is specifically to do with the manga, its execution and the pros and cons of that experience. It's my understanding that particularly with this final arc, Togashi, for multiple reasons I'm sure, encountered trouble in fully realizing it, and due to that fact, the anime took liberties by changing the story to some degree in order to make a more coherent narrative experience. Because of this, many see the anime version of events as the definitive version to cite. I will not be doing this. My interest for this series has squarely resided on the production and product of the manga itself, and specifically the work of Togashi. Whether a vision is successful like the Dark Tournament arc, or whether it came up short, like maybe this will, it's through examining that process as well as trying to understand the behind the scenes goings on to make sense of that I'm interested in as a reviewer. We use footage from the anime in these videos to smooth over the production of this review series, and so with that disclaimer out of the way, let's analyze what I thought of this final arc. Where Chapter Black led us into this story with what was essentially a cold open, The Three Kings leads us naturally from arc to arc by building upon revelations from the prior. With Yusuke revealed as being part demon, his father having ruined his big fight, and a one-way ticket to the darkest depths of the demon realm, Yusuke is given an ultimatum. Either stay in the demon world forever and search for his demon daddy, or return to Earth. Initially, he chooses to return to the human world, but it's here I'm first impressed with the framing Togashi has given this arc. Unlike how I anticipated at the beginning of this section, this arc doesn't, in a traditional sense, seamlessly flow from the previous, but instead almost presents a soft reset once Yusuke returns to the human world. And it's actually for a rather inventive reason, all the while establishing a fitting framing device for this conclusive arc. Normally, through soft resetting back to the status quo, one might expect things to return as they were, with Yusuke donning his spirit detective persona, fighting demons, infiltrating the human world, etc. However, it can't be that way now, because things are different, irreversibly so. Yusuke is a demon. His heart does not beat, and through all of this inactivity, he's getting bored from a distinct lack of cases or conflict to engage in the human world. And with this, it tells us that a certain distance has emerged between Koenma and Yusuke. Through a meeting with Genkai and eventually a meeting with the first ever spirit detective, we learn that there are fears that one day Yusuke's boredom could take the form of thoughtlessly destroying the world. He's too powerful now, and as mentioned in the text, his humanity seems to be in question here. But perhaps most importantly now, he can't be controlled. And so they insist he returns to the demon plane. And for me, this was a rather fascinating turn of events. Through offering this, Togashi is presenting Yusuke with a very similar ultimatum to that which he saw at the beginning of this story. Either go back to the human world or remain dead. At the beginning of the story, he initially felt as though he should remain dead, seeing as all the adult figures in his life pretty much called him a bad kid or a drain on society, that he was nothing but a negative force in people's lives. Ultimately, and thankfully, he chose to stay in the human world after he saw that he did offer value to people's lives and that he would be missed. However, now he finds himself in a similar situation, but under slightly different contexts. Similar to the very beginning, he's being pushed away by the first group to really accept him, Koenma and Ko. They now see him as a demon on the brink of chaos, but it's more complicated than a simple dilemma here. Instead of the motivating factor being there pushing of him away, he's in addition to that heading to investigate what's going on with his father, and that activity happens to coincide with the desires of Koenma and his group overseeing him. So, will Yusuke return? Once he makes the decision, what will his reasoning be? There's only one way to find out, but at any rate, I'm interested in seeing how Yusuke, after an entire series worth of development, might have changed in his approach to answering these very questions. Unfortunately, dear viewers, it is at this juncture in which the increasing issues with the story and Togashi's back evolves into something. I'm honestly not sure I can even really call what follows an arc. It's honestly one of the most baffling creative ventures I've ever had to experience. Now look, you might be thinking I'm exaggerating when I'm saying this, but if you could have only seen the reactions of both myself and my team when we were reading this, you'd understand a bit better. And if I break it down, I think it's pretty simple to understand why. The story itself starts off by outlining a 40-hour time limit that Yusuke has to search for his father in the demon realm. A couple chapters later, we're not utilizing that time restraint at all anymore, and instead we're piecing out back to the human world to reset the arc softly. That's okay. At this point, we realize that Yusuke's character is being called into question because, of course it is, he's Shadow the Hedgehog now. And now he's heading back to the demon world that we now can move freely between, by the way, so yeah, keep up with that, in order to meet with Yusuke's dying demon overlord of her father called Ryzen. This is why he's doing it. From here, Togashi starts to write what appears to be a political demon thriller with a battle on 3 fronts. Each one is helmed by either Kurama, Hiei, or Yusuke himself. A story of which, at this point, you can really tell that Togashi is struggling either with his health, his motivation, or both, because the art delivered for all of this is effectively rough sketches. From this point, over a year passes and Yusuke's father dies, leaving Yusuke to make the first move in this war. At this point, a lot of the pieces have been moved by Kurama, and we've learned a lot about Hiei's positioning on his side of the conflict that he's helming. But everything isn't as it seems, because Yusuke basically shows up and says, political thrillers are cringe, want to do a tournament instead for the fate of demons and the human world? So they all agreed to do this, and so the tournament just gets underway, and Yomi, one of the 3 kings, he has a son now. He's not important at all, but I think at one point he was supposed to be. The tournament starts and there's just way too many people, and I'm getting worried because we're on the last volume of manga now and Togashi still has an entire tournament to write. So I start reading and then I see this. So what this tournament isn't really a tournament. It isn't really anything. All it is Togashi skipping over stuff until finally...
How was it?
It was the greatest tournament I've ever seen in my life! And you wouldn't believe the celebrities who did cameos. Dustin Hoffman, Michael Jackson...
Yeah, that's right. Right when the biggest fight of the arc was about to go down, Yomi versus Yusuke, it cuts to months afterwards, and all that's left is Togashi telling us what happened. And if we ignore the pain Togashi might be in, or the lack of interest he may have in completing this story, in a vacuum, this is objectively atrocious storytelling. And then it gets weirder, because we still have half a volume of stuff to go. From this point on, all that we encounter are disparate story threads, some only a couple chapters long, some only a couple of pages long, all with the sole purpose of getting us to the finish line of this series as fast as humanly possible. As a concept, I think the notion of returning back to the episodic nature in the same way the series began to bookend is a cute idea, but in practice it just feels entirely pointless. I pointed out at the beginning of this series that while I typically dislike episodic stories, there are ways to get the most out of them. In YuYu Hakusho's case, Togashi leveraged the format to warm us all up to the new characters before we launched into something more substantial. Now it feels like a crutch. Now it's just worse and boring. After this series of breakneck mini-plots, we finally land on the final 2 chapters, and thankfully it feels a lot less frantic. It feels almost nice getting to see everyone together one last time expressing how they feel in ways that feel true to their characters. However, by this point, it was but a sobering reminder of what could have been rather than the cherry on what could have also been a very fun and captivating cake. To call this an arc presupposes an overarching story that's held together by a clear vision with the goal of telling a compelling tale. And while this arc does technically have structure in places, it is ultimately less like a story and more like the notes of a struggling artist spiraling unrestrained and clumsily towards a conclusion he desperately needs to reach. This arc feels like Togashi had 5 stories he wanted to tell, and instead of telling one well, he decided to smush them all together and improvise what was left. If manga was music, this arc is freeform jazz but performed by a sickly orangutan. It certainly has its moments, but my god, does this have some choices. And look, I might be sounding harsh, but I think the reason I felt this way is because we know at this point what Togashi is capable of and what he will be capable of very soon in HunterXHunter. However, I think this arc, if nothing else, possesses something that we can all take away as a positive for in the future. A lesson that if I were to have watched the anime, I would never have taken away. So, do I recommend YuYu Hakusho as a manga and story? Absolutely. I think there's more than enough terrific storytelling and artistry on display to warrant at the very least a passing glance. Despite its ending feeling quite disjointed and chaotic, I have to say I was massively impressed with this story by Togashi. And what's more is, I think it gave me a whole new appreciation for HunterXHunter as a result. For those that didn't watch my HunterXHunter series, I effectively became so overwhelmed by the negativity I saw permeating the pages I was reading that it in turn negatively impacted my overall experience with the manga and my memory of it. So, what changed between then and now? Well, to avoid divulging too many personal details online, I'll just say that this month my family and I were stricken with a rather sudden and shocking loss. And within that situation I was forced to not just navigate that turmoil, but also figure out a way to manage my own workflow. Entrenched in the middle of a review series places a lot of pressure on output I wanted to deliver for you all. I considered trying to deal with both to conduct business as normal, forcing myself to work through the pain. However, clearer heads prevailed, and in the end, I was fortunate enough to be able to take a step back, delay this video, and lean on the support of my team to help make up for the difference. But what does this have to do with HunterXHunter and Togashi? Well, regrettably, Togashi has become a mangaka famous for his shortcomings and struggles. His career is defined by his cultural contributions through series like YuYu Hakusho and HunterXHunter. However, almost invariably, there's an ever-present asterisk next to his name. That being his declining health, as it almost always at some point impacts his work and enthusiasm for it. With YuYu Hakusho, you can tell he was contending with inspiration issues as well as a tremendous amount of pain, yet despite this, either by personal choice, obligation to jump, or both, he knuckled down and brute forced his way through the final arc of this series, and it unfortunately shows. And this is what gave me a new appreciation for Togashi, funnily enough. Through his transparent output as well as the obvious struggle this arc was for him, I have, for the very first time ever, been able to look back on my time with the Chimera Ants arc of HunterXHunter and say that, while I can still feel the pain and turmoil of Togashi's life flow through each page, I can now see much more than a simple man crumbling to the depression that's enveloping his life. I can see an artist that has grown to accept the limitations of his body, his health, and his mental state, and through that acceptance learn that, just like I had to, stepping back to recover both mentally and physically so that the artwork you go through all this pain for is delivered in a fashion you can be proud of. And no matter what your opinion is on Yu Yu Hakusho, whether you agree with my analysis or not, you cannot say that Togashi was happy with the way this series concluded. And despite the time between chapter releases growing wider and farther apart for HunterXHunter, with each passing second, Togashi reinforces my belief that he's uncompromising in his vision and love for that story. And in a way, through fighting this uphill battle against his own body and mind, learning from his mistakes with Yu Yu Hakusho's final arc, Togashi has become a mangaka I have grown to have the utmost respect for. He's a true artist and visionary dedicated to delivering his masterpiece when his mind and body allows, and I don't think very many other artists out there could say that they have pushed through as much pain and sorrow as consistently as Yoshihiro Togashi. And so if and when I do return to HunterXHunter, I won't see pain anymore. I'll see courage. And I'm a little ashamed that it took Yu Yu Hakusho to show me that. But thankfully, we have reached the end of this series, and with it, we now look onto the horizon and see and await for Netflix's live-action Yu Yu Hakusho. Will it live up to the hype, or will it spiral into chaos? Only one way to find out, and we'll be covering that next.